our dear speakers, Noor, Ahmad, Hamid, Mark Cochrane, and Jennifer Glynn, and our moderator, Gary Grimmer, industry stakeholders nationwide, colleagues in the government, members of the ACCA team, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning and welcome to the webinar on global mice situation in the time of the pandemic. The first 4 months of the year 2020 have been challenging for the whole Philippine tourism industry. We have been faced with a number of challenges. We had the unrest of the volcano and now COVID-19. These challenges, unfortunately, have affected our gains, which includes our banner year in the year of 2019, where we had a 50% increase over the previous year. The enhanced community quarantine in different parts of the country and lockdown in different parts of the world has presented us with a problem and an opportunity. A problem on how do we meet or how do we promote tourism when we are asked to stay at home, and how do we implement our programs when majority of the world is put on pause. However, we also look at it as an opportunity for us to rethink our initiatives up to the new normal. One sector that of the tourism industry that is severely hit, of course, is the meetings, incentives, conventions, and exhibit industry. She relies heavily on face-to-face encounter and gathering of business people with which the ECP was made more difficult. But this is not a problem unique to the Philippines. The MICE sectors of other countries are likewise affected by our current pandemic. Recognizing this, the Philippine Department of Tourism and its marketing arm, the Tourism Promotions Board, in partnership with the Philippine Association of Convention and Exhibition Organizers and Suppliers, PACEOS, and the Tourism Congress of the Philippines, have put together this webinar for our Philippine MICE players and tourism stakeholders alike, precisely to find ways to move forward. We are privileged to have caliber speakers from the 4 segments of MICE to share with us a situationer on the effects of the pandemic on the MICE industry globally and regionally, and to share their insights on the future of MICE. We are confident that the information that they will be sharing with us today would be essential inputs to our recovery plans and allow us to bounce back as soon as possible. To this end, I would like to thank our partner, the PACEOS, especially to Exlinkevents, for providing the platform for this productive webinar. Now more than ever, we must all close ranks and intensify our collective efforts to once again position the Philippines as a premier leisure and MICE destination. With this, I wish you all a fruitful and interactive discussion this morning. Thank you and mabuhay kayong lahat.
Okay, thank you, Madam Secretary. The words I heard were close ranks and collective action, and that's certainly a call that is important for the Philippines and for everyone in this industry. Welcome all. We're glad to be part of this broadcast to share our thoughts and hear some of your questions and thoughts. As a quick self-introduction, my name is Gary Grimmer. I'm Executive Chairman of GainingEdge, which is a global convention industry consulting firm based here in Melbourne. It's my great pleasure to be the moderator, but we've got some excellent speakers here for you today. And also we want to hear from you and make this as interactive as possible. But again, first, I want to again thank Madam Secretary for starting this broadcast with us, and all of us from different parts of the world watched you and thought to ourselves, we'd like to have a tourism secretary like you. So thank you very much for your introduction. Just by way of starting this off, I wanted to mention again, we want you to ask questions. If you have any questions, there's a comments box that you can enter your questions into. We will see them on our screen, and we will be selecting the ones that we see and that we think fit into the program the best. We'll try and cover off as many of them as we possibly can. The other message is that this is being recorded, which doesn't really affect anyone but the speakers, but it affects you, the audience, in the sense that you'll have a chance to download the recording, to share it, to review it, to the extent that it's helpful to you. So again, let me, on behalf of all the speakers, welcome you and say that we're really glad to be here as part of your effort to seek out the right response to the COVID crisis by the Philippines. I mentioned we have three great speakers. We're going to run this by market segments. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about the incentive market, then we'll talk a bit about exhibitions, and finally, we'll talk about associations. And after each of those, we'll give you a chance to ask questions, and I'll be asking some questions of our distinguished panel. So I want to kick it off. We're just going to introduce each panelist as we go. Our first speaker will be Jennifer Glynn, who is president of the Society for Incentive Travel Excellence. And just by way of a little bit of background on Jen, she's managing partner with Meeting Encore and vice president of client engagement for Intuitive Conferences and Events. In terms of her background, she brings us also a bit of a sales perspective, which I think is important because she had sales roles across Canada with Delta, Pan Pacific, Kempton, Starwood, and Marriott. She's also very community activist focused. She's volunteered with financial and insurance conference professionals, with meeting planners, our Meeting Professionals International, and many other charitable organizations. So welcome, Jen, and we're really looking forward to hearing your view on the landscape in terms of global incentives and how it relates to the Philippines.
Thank you, Gary. I'm grateful to be joining you all today. Thank you for including me. It's hard to imagine that in late January, many incentive travel professionals joined us in Vancouver at our largest site global conference. We were all looking forward to a strong 2020, and the weeks that have followed are unprecedented. I've been in the biz for, like Gary said, 30 years and have seen our industry recover from 9/11, SARS, recessions, etc. And honestly, nothing as far-reaching as this pandemic. But this too shall pass, and the event industry will remain forever changed as a result of it. As Gary said, my day job is managing a number of companies. One of them is Intuitive Conference and Events, which has now pivoted from managing incentive travel programs and sharing our stories with our clients on how incentive travel can drive business results, to now providing guidance to our clients on mitigating these times. My volunteer role is to be the calm voice for our site members during these crazy times, and some days it's easier than others. COVID-19 has caused devastation in our sector. No business or individuals have been spared. The UN World Tourism Organization is estimating a decline in 2020 of international tourism between $300 and $450 billion US. That's a third of the $1.5 trillion that industry generated in 2019. That is the equivalent of 5 to 7 years worth of growth lost to COVID-19. To put that into perspective, 2003 SARS decline was 0.4%, 2009 global economic crisis was 4%, and 2020 COVID is expected decline of 20 to 30% for all of us globally. Till a vaccine or treatment option is available, there will be a cautious optimism on the return of events. And this will require travel professionals, no matter what group segment we hear from tonight, to look at health, safety, and event design implications for all of our programs. So the good news is we are seeing stay-at-home restrictions starting to ease in some countries, and we're turning to see some semblance of normal, or what our new normal reality will be, specifically with safety and hygiene practices being implemented. Airline traffic will be the biggest factor to restarting our industry, and specifically the incentive travel for all of us who are aching to get out from our homes. Travel Weekly posted an article on post-COVID air travel, from protective screens for check-in agents to in-flight janitors and thermal scanners. The airlines adapted post 9/11 to build trust of the traveler, and they are being challenged again to build this confidence for all of us. Some governments globally have woken up to the value of the events industry as a result of the significant economic loss and are working on solutions to help support businesses in our industry, realizing that events and incentive travel can be a significant economic contribution to a destination. Well, our customers, personally, I'm seeing positive outlooks for incentive travel. The programs, some still remaining for late 2020, but majority of businesses are focused on 2021 and beyond. Personally, I'm currently sourcing programs outbound for 21, 22, and 23. Most of my corporate clients, though, are taking it to a proceed with caution approach, postponing, not canceling their incentive programs. The challenge is some companies are in what I'm calling analysis paralysis these days, just reviewing many scenarios, projecting their financial impact on COVID, and this just uncertainty leads to continued slowdown. But the more good news stories we hear in our media on the recovery starting will lead to more decisions on future incentive travel programs. Incentive travel programs focus on sales targets are revenue generators that corporations need to recover from this. Companies who have looked at virtual incentive programs in the interim for online gifting, virtual incentive award ceremonies, etc., but nothing can beat a shared experience. The incentive travel business is about creating memories. Organizations that understand the value of face-to-face incentive programs and allow that peer-to-peer connection and colleague to leadership dialogue will help lead retention, recruitment, and collaboration opportunities. We'll see smaller programs which could be implemented by either the level of the incentive travel program, by region, or by market, which has the opportunity to bring unique experiences and more personalization than we've often seen before. These programs will likely build from programs starting closer to home, driving distance possibly, train, or a short flight to start, followed then by national and international programs. We'll likely see a short-term increase in individual travel incentives because not all of us will be ready to jump on a plane and travel globally. Honestly, my husband can't wait for the day that I'm getting out of his hair again and not starting so many home projects. But slowly, our industry will rebuild. In answer to that growing threat of COVID-19 on all of our industry's businesses, CITE Institute communication campaign called Be Connected, Be CITE Strong. Our aim is to keep our community connected during these difficult times. We surveyed our members, asking them what they wanted to hear from us, and we had a record response. That resulted in us delivering curated content each week via CITE source under 4 pillars: information, insights, idea, and inspiration. And we've all restarted our private CITE LinkedIn group for our members. Here we share best practices, timely articles, and commentary from our members. Also, every 2 weeks, we are hosting webinars on timely topics. I hosted one a few weeks ago on contracts. Last week, we did one on health and wellness. And this week, I'm facilitating a session on health safety and what we need to understand is going forward for our programs. It's been interesting to see how people's communication started from virtual cocktail hours and how to adjust from working from home to now what does business look like in the future. It's very encouraging to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Hearing stories from our China-based CITE members on how life is starting to go back to normal or our new normal. Stories from others who are pivoting their business to adjust to new business demands. At CITE, we're also working on initiatives to support our members now and into the future. We have established a global business recovery task force led by John Ainini, our immediate past president of the CITE Foundation, and supported by a passionate group of volunteers that I'm pleased to lead from different sectors of our membership. The mandate will be to look at opportunities to help the incentive travel industry rebound as quickly as possible and demonstrating how incentive programs can be part of a corporation's recovery efforts. Thank you, Gary, for including me today on today's panel, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I can.
Okay, thanks, Jen. Appreciate that great presentation. Just again, for the audience to know, we're at about 820 participants in this webinar. Again, we urge you to ask any questions you want. We'll see them on our screen. I don't think you'll see them on your screen, but we can see your questions and we can respond to any comments or questions you want to share with us. Jen, you covered a lot there, and we'll kind of go a bit deeper into some of those issues you raised during the next few minutes, and then later on we'll have a panel with all 3 of you. But the first thing I wanted to do was let you help us get inside the customer's head a little bit. What are they thinking? What are they going through? And my first question is, when you think about incentive planners globally and in Asia especially, what are they busy doing right now?
Well, I kind of touched on the analysis paralysis. So right now for my customers, we're looking at different scenarios. It could be moving a program from that was supposed to actualize this year to next year, The whole media sensation about the comparison of the Spanish flu coming back has some people thinking that the outcome is going to be a longer term, so they want to look further out. So we're also just having those discussion about what are the risks to them of postponing versus canceling, because right now a lot of those programs are within a force majeure, so they can get out of the program, but they also want to make sure that the qualifiers are still rewarded in a positive way. So right now, majority of my incentive travel programs are moving to 2020, late 2020 or mid to early 2021. So with that, they're going through the scenarios and finding out, they're talking to their security team, they're looking at the financial implications that their own company went through. They're looking at things like, maybe they take the destination that they had originally considered and bring it closer to home. They're asking their qualifiers who won the programs what they want to do. Do they want to travel individually? Would they rather have a cash reward? But right now it's still very much on the engagement of that face-to-face, which is, I think people are still remaining positive. We have, like I said, I'm facilitating a session on health safety with a doctor this week, and one of our corporate planners is joining us as well from Abbott, and she's having a program in November, and she actually sees an opportunity for adding more programs because people have just been through the ringer through this whole thing, and they see incentive travel as a way to thank their employees for the engagement they've done, the contributions they've made. So, I think we'll see smaller programs and programs changing, but that they're still being considered for employee engagement and for revenue, for sure.
Well, and it's interesting when you think about incentives. That's the shortest planning horizon, isn't it? I mean, I'll be interested to see what our other speakers think about what you used the word semblance of normal, and then the question, of course, is how do we return to that? And it's probably going to be in a staged sort of way. You've mentioned, yep.
You just touched on a point there about incentive travel programs can be, a lot of my programs are 2-year qualification programs. So one things that the agency partners, as well as the end user, corporate end user is doing, is looking at those contest rules and basically throwing them out the window and starting again, right? Because obviously the amount of revenue generated for 2020, no matter what business you're in, is probably down, unless you're working for Amazon or somebody in the virtual world.
Yeah, and that, you made me think of another question too. Usually when companies are suffering financially, which all companies are today, the first thing they do at a time of economic contraction is that they start cutting their travel budgets. So just what's the big picture in your view? Will corporations cut their travel budgets, which means less incentive movements? You've already said some of them may be smaller and closer to home, but what do you think about corporate budgets going forward?
I think, I think it's making everybody take a step back and look at life in general, right? We've seen the impact it's had already. But so I think both on the meetings and incentive travel programs, they're going to, instead of just doing it for the sake of doing it, I think there'll just be more strategy associated with both the meeting and incentive markets. So, I mean, we still have the old school incentives that Bob's had one every year. And, your typical 50 to 65-year-old, they go to Hawaii every other year, that type of thing. And now I think you're just going to see, yes, corporate budgets are going to be cut, and non-essential travel will happen for a long time. Sorry, essential travel only will happen for a long time. And it'll start with the corporate travel market coming back a little bit, and then we'll see it move into the small meeting market, and it'll build from there. But I think it depends if a corporation's looking at incentive travel as a strategic decision and a driver to help rebound their overall revenue, or if they're looking at it as just a nice to have, right? So I think taking a step back on the meeting side too, so many people have pivoted to virtual meetings. We're at Intuitive Conference Events, we're moving a lot of meetings to virtual. And I think you'll see that remain for a little bit, and you'll see hybrid events come in which will be a component of a conference that people want to be there face to face, but others may want to just engage with them virtually. So, but when they do get together, I think we're actually going to have more meaningful discussions and more meaningful experiences, both on incentive travel and meetings, because a talking head at the front of a room can be done virtually, and it's been, and you know, people have pivoted to that. So now that we're coming together, how do we have more dialogue with senior leadership? How do we have more collaboration? How do we have more unique experiences on the incentive travel program that leave a lasting effect on those individuals?
Yeah, so you're talking about change of focus in terms of the programs, and I think the other thing that tends to happen when the economy tightens, all of a sudden the incentive planners are under a bit more scrutiny by their corporate board members and their stockholders, having to justify their expenditures. And when times are good, the key word for incentives is wow. What are the wow kinds of experiences that are going to incentivize people? When times are tough, wow sometimes becomes a bit problematic because it looks like it's people spending more money than they need to too lavishly or something like that. Do you anticipate incentives becoming a bit more conservative in the types of programs they put together?
Oh, I think you've already seen that for the last number of years. I think you'll also look at incentive programs that are coming to destinations, like emerging destinations like the Philippines, and looking for more opportunities to either give back and incorporate CSR into their programs, or they're going to be looking for more meaningful events. And again, it's going to start with the smaller destinations that they feel safer traveling to as well. But I think overall, what we said is, as industry professionals, no matter what segment you're in, the more that you are able to elevate your position and articulate the value proposition that your role plays in that company, you're going to get ahead. And right now, what better time than, there's lots of webinars, there's free education. I mean, you can learn a new language, you can learn piano while you're off. But a lot of these of our association colleagues out there are offering free education, sites offering our education free for our members, certification, but it's also arming yourself with tools on what's changing in the industry, how should you redesign your programs, what should you look at. So I don't know, I think it's just time for everybody to look inward and figure out how they can make a contribution to the industry.
Okay, and before we go on to our next speaker, I'm going to ask you one last question. Our audience is, they're all from the Philippines, they're in this industry. What's your number one piece of advice? What should they be doing? Do incentive planners want to hear from them right now? And if so, what should they be doing?
If you have established relationships with corporations and people that you've been doing incentive travel before, definitely reach out to them. Now's not the time to sell or send me a list of, I'm kind of shocked sometimes. I get lists of need dates and that this is what's happening at this destination. But at the same time, they're not there yet. But people, want a genuine connection with other individuals. So just reach out and see how people are doing. Do an emotional check-in on the people that you've already worked with. But in the meantime, as a destination, continue to look at certification for your hotel salespeople, or the DMCs the destination management companies, making sure that as a destination you have strong contributors in your region will help you recover faster. And looking forward to different planning. Like, we've always had to look at crisis management planning, but now we also have to look at the effects of, okay, so somebody arrives on site at whatever event, conference or exhibition, and has a temperature. What is your protocol on how to dealing with that? So there's just different crisis management plans. So take the opportunity now, because when people come to look at your destination, they're going to look at, are you armed? Are you prepared? Do you have the right resources and infrastructure in place in order to build that confidence of people bringing them? Because as an agency, we're talking to our users, our planners, about objectives and what they're looking for, and but we also need to understand new destinations that are coming out there. We can build the dream and sell that, but I still have to get past the safety and security guy at that insurance companies, and make him feel confident that the destination I'm proposing is a good fit.
Thanks for that, Jen. Appreciate it. And we'll have you back a little while later, and when we have a full panel discussion. But that's giving us a good insight into the landscape on incentives, and we thank you for that. Our next speaker is Mark Cochrane, who is Regional Manager of the Global Association of the Exhibition Industry. You know it as UFI, or Union Internationale des Associations. So it's basically the convention, or the association of trade fairs and exhibitions. Mark is based out of Hong Kong. He's also Managing Director of Business Strategies Group. You may know it as BSG. It's a business intelligence and strategy consulting firm, which is focused in on B2B media industry in Asia, again, with a focus primarily on exhibitions and events. Mark has an MBA from Thunderbird, the American Graduate School of International Management. He's on the board of the Business Information Association, and as I said, he's coming to us from Hong Kong. And looking out your window there, it looks in Hong Kong today. Don't tell us about your weather. Tell us about the exhibition industry.
I'll tell you about the weather first. Yeah, it's a gorgeous day, blue skies everywhere. Thanks, Gary. So I'll just take about 5 minutes to give everyone a quick overview of what's going on in exhibitions, primarily in Asia. And much like Jen said in her opening remarks, this is an impact, a crisis unlike we've never seen before. SARS is the closest thing, 2003, when some markets shut down, but obviously this is a complete global shutdown for B2B and B2C exhibitions worldwide. I think if we look at China first, that would be instructive. It's the largest exhibition market in Asia. They began canceling and postponing shows in January with a full stop in February. No events have taken place in China since then. There's some confusion as to when events will restart. The State Council, which is the highest political body in China, issued a statement at the beginning of April that said no mass gatherings, including exhibitions, until further notice. But what we're seeing now is some provinces are kind of testing how far they can push it. There are some B2C events that are supposed to go ahead actually later this week. The first one that we've heard about is the Changsha Auto Show, which is primarily a B2C event. And despite the State Council requirement, they're going to push ahead with that. We have also heard about events in Chengdu and Qingdao. So China was the first into the crisis and will probably be the first out. The rest of Asia is essentially shut down with no exhibition activity whatsoever. A few venues are being used for medical and testing services, like in Manila. I think the World Trade Center is a medical site. Here in Hong Kong, Asia World Expo is being used for testing for Hong Kong residents returning from the nearby airport. Also in Korea, Kintex, a major venue there, has plans to host an event in the first week of May, which I guess is next week. So slowly, some markets starting to move back into action. The impact, it's going to take months to calculate it properly. UFI has taken a stab at that with economic impact of 145 billion US dollars to the end of Q2. That's in terms of lost orders from exhibitions that have been canceled all around the world, and with another 88 billion US in direct impact to the exhibition industry from events not happening, the F&B spend, employment not happening. So I'll take a couple minutes just to look at likely outcomes, how things are going to move forward positively in the exhibition industry in Asia. As I mentioned, China will open first, primarily with domestic events. Any exhibition market that has a strong domestic event sector will be able to move ahead first after their country's cleared. So that means primarily China, Korea, Japan. Unfortunately, for markets that really rely on international participation at their exhibitions, it's going to be longer. So here in Hong Kong, we're down to about 200 active cases. Everything's been moving in the right direction for 3 or 4 weeks. But the exhibition industry coming back to proper strength is a long way off, because so many of Hong Kong's exhibitions, essentially all of them, unless they're a local B2C event like a book or a computer show, most of them are sourcing events that require buyers to come in from around the world. So Hong Kong, Singapore, to a lesser extent, Bangkok and KL will be slower to bounce back. Couple other impacts that we're anticipating. Venue capacity is going to be an issue in venue constrained markets. So Hong Kong, Tokyo, possibly Bangkok, possibly Shanghai. You've got more and more events trying to squeeze into the second half, or maybe even just the last quarter of the year. There's only so many days and only so many venues. So that's going to be an issue for the industry. I think also just who survives this crisis will also impact the industry. So a lot of service providers, so the people who build the stands, provide the F&B, a lot of those are labor intensive, particularly the stand contractors, right? How many of them are going to survive? How many of them will be able to get back to full strength soon? If the stand contractors aren't there, it's going to impact the quality of events and undermine the recovery overall. Similar with SME organizers, not all of the organizers are as big as Reed or Informa, who are definitely going to survive this, but it's made up of hundreds and thousands of small exhibition organizers around the region. How many of them can survive missing one revenue cycle, or possibly even 2 revenue cycles? So that'll have a massive impact on the competitive landscape on the other side of this. The portfolio is a key player. So I mentioned Reed and Informa. Even they may, they'll obviously come through this, but they may look at what their portfolios look like. Do they want to focus on their biggest and strongest events? Do they want to shed some of their weaker events? But even their large, strong events might look different, because so many industries have been impacted by this. If you look at an auto components exhibition, how many of their exhibitors will have gone out of business or not have the budget to participate in the next edition of the event? So some of those events will look smaller. Gary, I'll just take a couple more minutes, just 1 more minute, I'll say, just to comment on the role of government. So different governments around the region are going to take a different approach to which industries they support, how much they support events and exhibitions, and that will really have an important impact on the shape of the exhibition industry in individual national markets around Asia. So some markets like Thailand, Singapore, Hong Kong have already announced packages from their government. In Hong Kong, they're doing, after the virus is clear, they're going to do 12 months of free venue rental for all organizers that hold exhibitions at either Asia World Expo or HKCEC, the 2 main venues here in Hong Kong. They're also going to be subsidizing some of the exhibitors at TDC events. So Hong Kong government's already come out with a pretty strong package. Some markets will provide no support, and I think that'll really undermine the ability of the exhibition industry in those markets to recover, because they'll lose organizers, the quality of their events will go down, and their competitiveness versus another market like, say, Hong Kong or Singapore will also slip. So it's really a very crucial moment, not just coming out of the virus and the impact, how long it's going to take to recover, but what the industry is going to look like in each of these individual markets around Asia. I'll make 2 final comments just about what UFI's doing for our members. So we're organizing UFI Connects, which are webinars much like this, several per week on a variety of topics. And we also have Novel coronavirus resource page, which can be referred to everything from what packages governments are providing to advocacy that UFI's doing on behalf of the industry with governments around the world. Okay, that was more than 5 minutes, but I'll stop there, Gary.
Okay, I'm just looking at a question here very quickly from the audience. Okay. You mentioned a couple of things there that I think are key. You started talking a little bit about what the rebound looks like, and you said that it would probably be more the consumer shows first. It'll be the local or national shows first. The international shows will be longer in coming. So of course, you're talking about kind of the commercial drive or the market drive there and how the market will respond. But you also mentioned governments and what they're doing. And I guess one of my questions is, do you see the trade organizations and governments like JETRO, TITRA, COTRA, they're all in the business of producing export trade shows.
Right.
Do you see that coming back anytime soon, or because they depend on foreign buyers, that's still a bit of a problem, isn't it?
Right, yeah, right. So all those that you mentioned, like TITRA in Taiwan, the TDC here in Hong Kong, they organize events, and the focus of those events are bringing in international buyers to place orders with Hong Kong and Chinese businesses, with the example here in Hong Kong. So it's going to be difficult for those. I don't know. I don't think anybody knows what the shape of recovery for those events looks like. But one possibility, I think, is if we get a safe network of countries in Asia that are clear of the virus. So let's say just theoretically like Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, Thailand, then it's possible that Hong Kong could start hosting an international sourcing exhibition again, a B2B event, where there are certain countries that are clear to come in with no quarantine, no issues. And I think that's going to be the first step towards recovery of B2B events.
Okay, thanks for that. One of the questions that one of the audience, and I should mention, we're over 1,000 now. We've got about 1,010 people watching out there. One of the questions that's been asked is, would UFI be coming out with any suggested new standards on, how to run exhibitions, how to improve the quality? Is UFI doing any work in terms of, okay, once this thing's over, how can we help our members in the industry do it better than they used to do it?
Yeah, and obviously that'll be a work in progress, but UFI already has on its website some best practices for venues, taking that into account. But there's going to be a lot of changes to the way exhibitions run in the future, whether it's insurance policies, which is a big issue of whether they're covering cancellations versus postponements, social distancing. So is spacing between booths going to be different? Are virtual events going to be a required part of B2B and B2C exhibitions? F&B procedures, all of that I think is going to be a work in progress. And UFI is working through our committees with all of our 800 plus members around the world on what some of those changes should be to help us get out of this faster.
Okay, and actually, one of the audience members just asked that question. You've kind of addressed it, the issue of physical distancing, because they need that when they're doing their planning on capacities and floor plans. Right. Will UFI give guidelines on that?
I think specific distancing is going to come down to a country by country, a market by market basis. But we're already actually advocating for exhibitions to be brought back sooner, because although spacing and social distancing may continue to be an issue, one of the concerns we have is that a lot of governments are just going to lump all kinds of events together. So our concerts, live music, conferences, exhibitions, they're not all the same. There's natural spacing, and it's easier to manage social distancing with an event like exhibitions versus live music. So we're really trying to get that message across to governments so they realize that B2B exhibitions, trade shows in general, number one, they're different than a live event like a concert. And also they're a key driver to the economic recovery because buyers come in, they place orders with local businesses, and that gets the economy going again.
One of the interesting things that we've talked about is there will be issues about putting people in rooms together, or even in big exhibition halls together, as you suggest, in theaters together. One of the notes I have for optimism is that when you think about it, governments are not going to be able to tell their people that there can't be live sports events
Right.
for a really long period of time. I mean, there's going to be enormous pressure, especially in a country like Australia that's so sports crazy. So I think once governments start allowing sporting events, it's a little bit hard to justify not allowing people to meet in relatively large spaces as long as there's social distancing. I would say that in an exhibition setting, you can have better social distancing than even by blocking every other seat in a sports stadium. So I mean, I do think it'll be about the guidelines and how the industry manages all that. We had another question from somebody in the audience, which was pointing to the fact that, as they said, they acknowledged that probably there'd have to be a vaccine first before there are international exhibitions. And they were asking about what exhibitions would look like and what the new normal will be. I'm going to save that. We've seen that question. We will get to that, but I'm going to save that for the latter part of this session, where we're going to have the whole panel talk about what the new normal looks like. So again, thank you very much, Mark. That was a great presentation. Gave us a great view as to the exhibition industry. I'm going to ask you one last question because I asked the same question of Jen. Take us inside customers' heads. They're busy. You're saying they're already trying to get their B2C meetings happening by the end of the year or maybe the first quarter of next year. Maybe take us more inside the heads of the B2B people and maybe more of the international B2B people. What are they thinking? What are they doing? And what should the Philippines be saying or doing with them?
Right. So I think with B2B exhibitions, it really depends on the profile. So if it is a domestic sourcing event, you can have a successful B2B exhibition coming up in Korea or in China once all the restrictions are lifted. If you're an international organizer, it's a lot trickier because it depends on how international the event is. You know, if it's a international jewelry show like we have here in Hong Kong or in Bangkok, those are massively international events that count on sometimes buyers from 100 different countries coming. So I think it's very tricky for them to try and assess when can they reschedule, when do they have to postpone. I think they're busy trying to make a best guess about, okay, are we going to be able to squeeze it in the last quarter of this year? What would it look like if we lost 50% of our buyers or 30% of our buyers? So there's a lot of scenario planning that I think Jen alluded to in there as well. So if you're a domestic B2B exhibition organizer in some of these markets, it's easier and coming clearer. If it's an international show, it's just very difficult, and they're just doing their best scenarios and then putting probability on each of those, I think.
Okay, but I'm going to ask it again. If I'm an international exhibition organizer, like you say, that's so unsure as to when I can ramp up again, what am I doing right now other than trying to arrange bridge loans?
I think that's the main thing. I mean, if you can't hold your event and it's your main source of revenue, I think that's why we're so worried about a lot of the SME organizers, because there's a high probability now, even if you went back a month, a lot of people were feeling confident in various markets in Asia. We're going to get back to it by June, July, definitely by August. And a lot of that optimism has evaporated now, especially in Europe. They're talking about 2020 being a complete wash. So if you're an event here in Asia that counts on European buyers, I mean, your hands are kind of tied. You can't, if the event requires your key VIP buyers coming from Europe and they can't come, you can try and do virtual, but not from a standing start, I don't think.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mark. We've got Orly in the background here, who's our technician, and he's kind of managing the questions you're asking. So Orly, every once in a while, flash them back up so we don't miss them later on. We've only had one so far that we haven't quite gotten to. I didn't quite get it down, so we'll come back to you, whoever that was. But we do want to move on and move to the association market now. So the next person that I want to introduce is Noor Ahmad Hamid, who is the Regional Director Asia Pacific for ICCA, which also you know as the International Congress and Convention Association. Noor has been with ICCA since 2009. He's been, in my view, the major reason why ICCA is now the largest chapter, and ICCA Asia is the largest chapter in ICCA's global community. So he's done an outstanding job of building our position in ICCA from Asia. Noor is a handy person to have on this call because he's also somebody who I go to when I'm looking for the pulse of Asia. He's all over Asia and has a good feel for what's happening in various markets. He also has a feel for what's happening in the association world. And obviously, because ICCA is mostly made up of supply side or suppliers, I should say, he has a good feel for what's happening on the supply side. Noor comes to us from Kuala Lumpur. So Noor, tell us the world from ICCA's perspective.
Thank you, Gary. And also, first and foremost, thank you to Department of Tourism, TPB, and PACEOS for organizing this webinar. I think this is a fantastic way that we can meet each other without traveling, the only option at the moment. So greetings to all the friends in Philippines. Kamusta? Of course, from the ICCA perspective, as for those who are not familiar with us, what we do at BEST is we track all the meetings organized by international associations. There are more than 250,000 meetings that we have tracked since as early as the 1800s and as future as in 2034, simply because most of the international association meeting characteristic is that they can be planned or confirmed far in advance, so through a bidding process. So that's what we do as BEST, and what Gary has mentioned. We have members all around the world, predominantly suppliers, whether they are from government, sector, venues, PCOs, and all the changes, supply chains that we have. And of course, Asia Pacific is where we have our largest member. From the slides that I would like to share with you today, if we recall what's been going on in China as early as middle of January, just before the Chinese New Year, just before the whole havoc had happened. We've been tracking, what are the potential impact to the meeting industry. And by middle of March, just a day before the World Health Organization named this new coronavirus into COVID-19, we came out with this particular release to say that, of course, the association industry is impacted. We saw very small, less than 7% meetings being affected. Some of the meetings, of course, being postponed or deferred to a later date. So a larger number out of a total of 4,300 over meetings that's supposed to be rotating around the world are still at that point going on. But interestingly enough, I was in Kuala Lumpur Convention Center in middle of February. One of the international association, which is the World Congress of Infectious Diseases, the irony of the whole situation, they themselves decided to postpone their event, which is supposed to take place in Kuala Lumpur in the middle of February, not so much because of the threat of the COVID-19, but because the members, the delegates, basically researchers who will be involved in their laboratory to start doing the research for this particular new virus. So that's why that particular event was postponed. So and eventually after middle of March and until today, so to speak, there's no point of tracking anymore what the meetings that's been impacted from this pandemic. Obviously, all events, not just conferences organized by international associations, they all have to be postponed or cancelled. This is the world new order. We're talking about the control movement order. We're talking about safety. We're talking about travel restrictions. So obviously, all this meeting cannot be held, and as association need to continue to communicate with our members. The only option that we have now is through webinars, through virtual meetings, just like what we're having now. If I can go to my second slide, it is interesting to note that for Philippines, this is the number of meetings, just to give you a bit of scenario of number of meetings that Philippines has hosted. So over the last 10 years, it has been a gradual trend of increase of number of meetings that Philippines able to host. So this is a good trend, And in particular for 2019, this is the unofficial data yet, because we're going to release the world ranking by middle of next month. Philippines has been doing the best over the last 10 years, with more than 70 meetings hosted in the Philippines. So this is something that's good. And obviously, we would know for 2020 ranking, it will be a huge disruption, not just for Philippines, but for all over the world. So that's the situation that's happening right now. And for ICA, what we do is we still in communication with our members. We know that some of the smaller members, the SMEs, will be badly impacted. We know that this is not just about number of meetings. It's about people life, people losing their jobs, company are closing down. And of course, this is the time more than ever, collaboration needed between the private sector and the public sector. Because the control movement order or travel restrictions are being imposed by the governments of the day. Eventually, nobody can organize any meetings, any conferences without the permit of the government of the day. We saw that huge economic losses due to all this postponement and cancellation. And of course, what is the biggest question is what is going to be the new norm? At the moment, as I said, we are going virtual, but is that how we're going to react in future? Optimism isn't optional, but it's compulsory. So the biggest question is for our industry and many other industries: how do you create, how you innovate, how you move on with all these challenges that we have? I'd like to use two quick examples. Number one is that the biggest car manufacturer in the world, that is Volkswagen. If I can have the slide, please. They are now starting to open up the operation. This is just amazing, you know, how can they assure thousands of workers be able to return to work without risking their health? I think this is going to be the new challenge. This is going to be the new norm for an organization that's huge as that particular car company. I think this is something that is positive. We need to look at the possibility of opening up. We can't be on lockdown forever, so there must be a way that we all look at this. I think we in the meeting industry or the MICE industry, we also need to ask ourselves, how could we innovate? If you're coming from hotel, how do you start reopening your business? We're getting reports from our members from destinations like Singapore or even Chinese Taipei, for example. Hotels are open. They have observed social distancing. In the past, when you have a table of 10, a round table, now the round table will have 4 to 5 people. And of course, they put in all the safety measures, the health measures as well, to ensure that meetings, business are been going on. Second example that I'd like to show about innovation is this low-cost carrier, which I'm sure that you are very familiar, AirAsia. They have a lot of flights within the region. And I think this is something that we can learn from in terms of what they are doing. This is just 4 days ago. AirAsia has introduced a new PPE for its cabin crew to be used as flight resume in the coming days for the region. So they're looking at a lot more flights within domestic flights, and also some flights within the region, because a lot of countries are trying to fly back their citizens back to their country. So this is good news for all of you in Philippines, because the AirAsia PPE is designed by your own Filipino, who is world famous now, of course. And I think this is the innovation that we need to see happening, not just in the airline, automobile industry, but how would the meeting industry or the MICE industry also react to this challenging time. Last but not least, I think the COVID-19 will definitely take a hard hit on the association business. I would definitely not lie to you by saying that you will be struggling to maintain or sustain some of the members, because some of the smaller companies will be closed down. we are looking at that effect coming into 2021 when we have the new membership roster. For 2020, of course, a lot of things are on hold, but definitely when we restart in the coming year, if we find a vaccine, it's going to be a challenging year for all.
Okay, thanks for that, Noor. ICCA, of course, is the way that ICCA does its work is it's focusing mostly on international conventions. So those are ones, I think, of over 50 people that meet in more than three or more countries on a regular basis. So that would certainly include Asia regional meetings, but not, say, national meetings. In terms of associations meeting again, in your view, is there going to be that kind of staged progression? I mean, the first thing we'll see are national meetings, then we'll start seeing gradual increase in regional meetings, and then the global meetings coming last. Is that pretty much consistent with what Mark was saying about exhibitions?
Yes, definitely. That in fact is what we are seeing happening at the moment. The bounce back would definitely be the national meeting. In fact, just like you say correctly, ICCA tracks meeting that rotates between 3 different countries, more than 50 delegates. That's how we term as international association meeting. This is going to be something of interest to ICCA now, to maybe start looking at national meetings organized by a national association. Because once the different countries will start opening up and the movement order being lifted, definitely local association would definitely be starting back their business. So the domestic meeting will come in first, and definitely we then talk about intra-regional countries, countries where travel are acceptable, because at the moment things are happening so fast. So many changes in terms of travel restrictions. In fact, almost every country in the world will have some sort of travel restrictions. That it's not only about gaining the confidence for the meetings to be organized again, but more importantly about whether you are able to travel, whether you're able to get the travel insurance to be covered, even whether your event can be covered by insurance.
And ICCA itself has a couple of meetings. One's regional, one's international. The regional one is the one you introduced so successfully in Penang a few months ago, which was the Asia Pacific Summit for all the ICCA members. And I think you've rescheduled that one to a bit later in the year. And also, I think, is it in November that the International Congress was to be held in Kaohsiung? How does ICCA deal with those kinds of issues? Can ICCA be holding the international meeting in Kaohsiung as early as this November or October or whenever it is?
That is a very difficult question indeed, Gary. Of course, we have two major events. One is the Regional Asia Pacific Summit, which we started last year, quite successful in terms of numbers and also in terms of participation from our regional members. We plan to have that event in June in Xiamen, China. And of course, with China being affected at the early stage, we have went back to them in the middle of March and agreed that the event will be postponed to later of the year. We actually have decided to have the destination second on the list to host the event, which will be in Yokohama in December. And Xiamen will be hosting the event next year in 2021. That is the plan that we have in March. But all the plans keep on changing every day because even at the moment, the travel safety is still a big question mark. For our Congress, which is planned in November in Kaohsiung, we are looking at all options. The board of directors of ICCA, as well as the local host committee in Chinese Taipei, we will be talking again this week. We have been engaging with them back and forth. We are looking at all possible options. And obviously, if you ask me this question now, I will say that there will be no Congress at the moment. But again, things are changing so quickly, and we hope that if things get back to normal, possibly there are a slim chance that we will have the Congress. But if situation does not improve, we have to look at other options we are now working on.
Okay, thanks for that, Noor. I, for one, hope hope the Kaohsiung still proceeds because I'm getting a little bored sitting here at home. And ICCA Congress is such a great way to connect with the industry, and it's a great opportunity for us in Asia that it's in Kaohsiung. Good for the Philippines that it's a hop, skip, and a jump away. So hopefully it either happens in November or happens pretty soon after that, and it'll be really good if we can all get together again. All right, so thank you for that. And I'd like to go ahead and bring the whole panel together now. We have scheduled this for between an hour and an hour and a half, depending on how the audience feels about staying here with us. We're still at over 1,000. So we're going to have about a half-hour panel discussion. We'll continue to accept or look at your questions and respond to them. But the first thing that I wanted to go to was just talking a little bit more about something that was alluded to before, the geographics of all this. Again, I think all of us have said it's going to be more local, regional, international in that order. But when you think of different parts of the world, I'd like to ask our panel their view. Will Asia be kind of an early reintroduction in terms of business levels? I think, Mark, you were saying in China it's starting to happen already, and in other parts of Asia. Is Asia going to rebound a little bit faster than other parts of the world? Start with you, Mark.
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, you're already seeing that. So China is slowly, cautiously getting back to business. And obviously, because it's such a massive economy, there's lots of domestic activity that can happen there, even without international travel coming back. And as I mentioned, we're down to 200 infections here in Hong Kong, and they're looking towards easing the restrictions here. Problem being that Hong Kong is a place of international business. So at least people can get back to their offices, get back to work, but international travel is still held back. But overall, yeah, I completely agree that Asia will sort of be a safe zone first before the rest of the world, just because it started here.
Jen, how about on the incentive side? Is Asia going to be a bit lucky and come back earlier, or you think it's going to be spread pretty evenly?
I think it'll come back regionally. So for neighboring countries, definitely. And just Asia's always been really quick to adopt technology and infrastructure and tools that they need to help support that, where other countries seem to be rushing to get back to it and might take a step back as a result of the rush to reopen everything all at once, in my personal opinion.
Yeah,
so I think we can learn a lot from Asia.
Well, it's a tough one. I mean, I've been reading a lot of economists' analysis saying if it's a tough call. If you come back early trying to save your economy and you have a second big infection rate, then your economy actually suffers worse than if you had just waited. So it's a tough call for when to actually start reopening economies. I wouldn't want to be a policymaker right now, I don't think, having to make that call. Noor, I'll let you know that one of our audience members was asking when can ICCA start planning some events in the Philippines. So I think we'll just take a note that there's some real interest there, and we can look at who asked that question. You can call them up and get them to help you do something in the Philippines.
Agree. Definitely, we look forward to go to Philippines, and in fact, for our annual congress, never been organized in Philippines yet. So we're definitely looking at Philippines as one of the
past due.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, so are you the director of the part of the world in ICCA that's going to bounce back first?
Definitely, Gary. I think, in fact, at the moment, I totally agree with Mark as well that what we are seeing today is that opening up in a smaller pocket of areas. It's not going to be the whole of China to be open for business. It's going to be pocket of areas. We saw Qingdao, Chengdu. We saw Shanghai now doing business. Hangzhou getting back to their feet. Xiamen. So this is our pocket of areas. Similarly, in part of Asia Pacific, I just read the news out of New Zealand. They are going to ease up their local travel restriction within the different states. And I'm sure that in Australia now, I heard report that you can play golf, but not in a foursome, but 2 golfers at a time. You still have to observe some kind of some sense of social distancing and safety. But eventually, all businesses has to reopen. We cannot keep on staying home. Of course, that is important for our safety. but governments of the day need to find ways, mechanism of how to allow people to get back to their business. I keep saying that meeting industry is about face-to-face meeting, and this COVID-19 separate us all. So they are really dividing us in what we do best, because we believe in face-to-face. It's fantastic that we have this virtual meeting, but you can't organize a 3-day conference where people are stuck in front of the computer. They'll be dead. So you need to go around, you need to meet around. So I think that's going to be the new norm for us. And like I said earlier, also we've seen some smaller activities happening in some parts of Japan, in Chinese Taipei, in Hong Kong, in Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, and Thailand. This is not happening yet because they are still trying to contain the numbers. They're still working on their curve. So I think as soon as that is done, every government of the day will definitely go back into the possibility of how to open up the business. And I think that eventually, with the industry coming together, we need to tell the government that the meeting industry, the MICE, the exhibition, as well as the incentive industry, are important for the economic growth, important for our community, and the opportunity to be open up just like any other industry.
I'm seeing a couple of comments and questions. Somebody else, by the way, just said that they look forward to having an ECA meeting in the Philippines. So you're going to have a few local champions to help you do that. And other people are asking questions about how there's a clear eagerness. We want this business back. How do we get it back? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Still setting the stage a little bit. You've kind of introduced, a few of you, the issue of point to point. Until there's a vaccine, people from safe countries can travel to other safe countries, but they can't travel all over the world because they're not going to go to unsafe countries. And until there's a vaccine and testing to prove people are well, are clear of the virus, delegates, association delegates, aren't going to go to a meeting if they think that there's going to be delegates coming from parts of the world that are still affected. So there's a little bit of that point-to-point issue. And in a way, Jen, I'd say incentives may offer a bit more, not only because they're shorter planning horizons, a little bit more near-term business, because incentives tend to be a bit more point-to-point. At least some of them tend to be more point-to-point than these global exhibitions, which need buyers and sellers from all over the world, and these global associations that need their members from all over the world and exhibitors. So incentives may be, how much of the incentive business is that kind of more narrower point-to-point versus global? There's a lot of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of both, right? We've seen now the Amway doing the very large incentive programs and other direct sales being the larger incentive sales. But the majority of the programs we work on, are 25 to 250 people will be probably the average. We have larger incentive programs, obviously, within our company, but yeah, it's easier to contain for sure, because you can take them to remote regions as well. You don't have to take them to a destination that has, more crowds. I mean, you can just design an incentive travel program with unique experiences out in the countryside or in a remote location than you can a major exhibition. You need the infrastructure built already. So that's why for emerging destinations, incentive travel is so attractive, because first of all, you can get people there because they're looking for a unique experience. They want to travel to somewhere else they haven't been in the world. And they also have higher budgets. So somebody had asked a question earlier on about, the cost of all these things. Somebody said about, are we going to get half price rental fees because we have to have the number of people in the meeting room? Well, no, because there's a limited number of revenue generators for that building, and the meeting space is that, and food and beverage is another one, both which need people in them. So what I've been talking to my clients about already is, even though your programs maybe half the size that they were before, don't take away half your budget, because no matter if it's a meeting or incentive, you have new challenges put forth to you. The virtual component, if it's a meeting, a hybrid meeting, you've got airline rates are going to go up. They have to pay for their loss and they need to recover from it. But if we're putting in social distancing measures on airlines in the short term, even those great new uniforms cost money. And if you're separating people and taking away things, then the cost is going to be driven up. So to my corporate clients, I'm saying hold your budgets or put some money into them, because even though it's a smaller program, the costs are going up.
Yeah. And one of our audience members again said, look, we're really anxious to get incentives going again as soon as possible, and what kinds of program changes will be likely. I think you've addressed a lot of that. But the last thing I want to say there about the Philippines and incentives is what I said earlier. You know, incentives, when times are good, it's all about the wow, and sometimes they're going to really exotic destinations. Now, to me, the Philippines is a beautiful destination, exotic. Some of the parts of the Philippines are exotic, very appealing. But I guess my argument would be, look, because of the pressure on budgets, because of the pressure from boards and stockholders, there's going to be this more kind of austere programming of incentives, because they don't want to have to justify, why are you spending all this money on what's seen as frivolous stuff? Why are you going to destinations that are seen as frivolous destinations? And one of the benefits in the Philippines, in my mind, could be its positioning as more of a business focused destination rather than all that wow. I mean, certainly the Philippines can deliver the wow, but in a way, does a destination like the Philippines maybe have a little bit of a advantage over some of those competitors of theirs that all they have is wow?
You know, absolutely. And I think it's about creating those authentic experiences too. So it doesn't have to be about champagne and caviar. It hasn't actually for our clients for a number of years now. But what I would do is, as a government or as a destination or a company, is right now take some time to have conversations with your stakeholders. Both, you know, as a government, take some of your product offerings and your internal stakeholders and ask them, what do they need to attract that market? What kind of funding, education, flexibility, and programming, any destination incentives to help to get people there? And then I would also say to those people, you know, industry associations asking each other, you know, to seek member feedback. And then as a agency or a DMC in the region, I would just ask corporate planners for feedback. I mean, don't call them and sell your product, but call people, trusted resources around the world. I mean, we all know individuals, and say, you know, what does this destination need to invest in now? It's creating those programs, it's planting those seeds with people. So take time right now to pick 5 or 6 programs that you can work on that are going to drive what you've said, Gary, about those authentic, still high end, because high budgets come with high expectations. So create something that's memorable, that's easy for you to sell in the long term. Now's the time to design them.
Okay, and I'm still seeing questions about when are things going to come back to normal, and we'll kind of carry that thread through this conversation. And Noor, I also want to alert you that one of our audience members has said that ICCA can have more fun organizing meetings in the Philippines, but I think that person may have been from the tourism board. I don't know. I'm just guessing.
Definitely, Gary. I saw a couple of names, Linda, Gemma, I think a few others were saying that ICCA should be coming back to the Philippines. Definitely. I was in Manila last year, and I'm looking definitely to come back, you know, to the Philippines. But I think the biggest question is not just about ICCA or any events coming back to the Philippines. I think the biggest question is how can the Philippine knitting industry come together? Because this is not going to be the new normal. This is going to be I think the competition after post-COVID-19 will be much more stiffer than ever before. Because before you talk about, you know, destination who are out there promoting, competing, but now this COVID, after COVID-19, things definitely going to be different. So the private sector and the government sector definitely has to work together and show that you're able to do that. Just a quick example, Gary, if I may. I just on the phone call with some of our members in Korea yesterday. Until last week, only one city in Korea actually is under the lockdown, which is Daegu, which is highly affected. But the rest of Korea are still business as normal. They still have domestic travel between Jeju to Seoul to Busan and so forth. So that shows how government actually are able to control the different regions, different parts of the country, and getting ready to all this new norm. I think if Philippines able to do that quickly, I think you'll be able to get ICA coming back to Philippines in no time.
And do you think you would have more fun organizing a meeting there?
Definitely, Philippines is the place where you have more fun. Or the most fun.
I think where did that slogan come from anywhere?
Yeah, it's a TPD slogan.
We do want to move to trying to kind of imagine what the new normal looks like at the end of this program, and we'll do that momentarily. But first, I've got one more kind of market, kind of a market framing question for Mark. You talked a lot about China. Everybody in the world talks about China. It's kind of the big place in the world now as far as exhibitions. I'm kind of curious about what the German messes that are so engaged in that industry are kind of thinking now. And I guess the question I want to ask you in terms of international, or even just the total industry in China, and this is partly about what the world looks like after COVID. Everything I'm reading says that companies, manufacturers are going to start sourcing shorter haul supply chain. So everybody's kind of thinking, oh, there's going to be a bit less globalization here. People are going to be looking for guaranteed supply chains. And if people look for closer by supply chains, that would have a big impact on China because China is the number one supplier in the world. It's the number one manufacturer in the world. And I've also seen some economists' analysis that China's growth is going to be very low. I mean, we're talking about a country that had as a policy that it needed to sustain 8% GDP growth a year, talking now down in the 1 or 2%. So China, like the rest of the world, it's not immune, and it's going to have severe economic consequences. Do you think that affects the total future scale of the Chinese exhibition industry?
Short answer, no, I don't think so, because there is certainly a lot of talk about what they call decoupling between the U.S. economy and China, finding different supply chain sources. But China, you know, for 2 decades now has been the manufacturer of choice for the whole world. Second biggest economy in the world, and it now has a massive domestic economy. So I think it's actually pretty well balanced in a lot of ways. There's a lot of domestic demand to support their manufacturing base. And you talk about shortening supply chains, okay, but then, you know, there's 2 billion people around Asia that can see China still as a short supply chain sort of destination of choice. So I don't really see it. China now accounts for about 55% of net space sold in the exhibition industry in Asia. And even if there is a bit of a decoupling and a slowdown in its economy, I still think just given the scale of the place, I'd still be pretty optimistic about exhibitions in China. People still have to source things. They still have to find suppliers and products.
Okay. All right. So with that, we've got 10 minutes left, and I do want to kind of put on our crystal ball gazing here and see if we can't look into the future and imagine what the world's going to be like. I'll ask each of you to comment on the question of how do you think this will change the world? What will be the permanent ramifications of this? How will things change? One of our audience members asked a question about social distancing, and we did address that earlier in this broadcast in terms of exhibitions specifically, talking a little bit about that. I think Jen mentioned the thing about flights and flight costs, and you know, one of the things that I wonder is when you think about airplanes and the tight quarters that the airlines have put us into in recent years. It almost makes me wonder if there won't be some new government regulation about spacing on airplanes. And of course, if there is a re-regulation of the airline industry, And if you do add spacing, that means lower load factors. That means higher cost per seat.
Right.
So I do think that may be one of the ways that there's a new normal, or the world's going to look different. But I guess start with you, Jen. How do you think this will change things permanently? What will we notice that's different than the way it used to be?
I think kind of like I commented earlier, after 9/11, we needed reassurance about the safety and security, that the flight was safe. So I think you'll see that hygiene and cleanliness, the airlines and cruise lines and hotels have always been doing it. We've already seen the rollout. Airlines and cruise lines did it earlier this year. But what they've done to build confidence by the consumer, which, the leisure travel as much as the corporate traveler and group traveler, on the hygiene and cleanliness effectiveness. And I also think that you'll see more programming have, right now for some of our international programs, we'll have a doctor or an undercover officer with them for safety and security. Now you might have a doctor or a nurse traveling with a larger group program, or a couple of them travel. So I think there's implications that will change that type of thing. But humans seek contact from each other. And I think once we have a vaccine and we're fast forwarding a couple of years down the road, I think we're going to fall back into a somewhat of a, still shaking hands and still giving our friends hugs that we see and travel with. So I think there'll be some changes. I don't think we can get down to the restrictions that they want on social distancing, because really, even if you're social distancing on a plane, you're still coming into contact with everybody else. So I think it's just building up the confidence in people through the communication more of what people are doing to reduce the spread of any disease.
Well, I think we just heard it from Jen in terms of the future, what we can anticipate. I was kind of worried we'd all permanently be doing elbow bumping now, but you're saying we may return to hugs and kisses before too long. So that's reassuring. Noor, what do you think? How are things going to change? What's going to be different?
A lot of things going to be different, Gary. Definitely, for one good thing is ICCA is going to Philippines, just like it's already a done deal earlier on. And I also just hope that not just ICCA, you can also invite SITE and UFI as well. There's so much fun in Philippines. But in all seriousness, Gary, I think the big game changer about this whole pandemic is that how we react, how we do business in future is a life-changing situation. So for international associations, just like ICCA, it's going to be a new ball game. We're looking at new business model, even in terms of servicing our members. In the past, we have some strength in the area of association database, but that's not going to be all the most important thing for the members anymore. So we need to reset, rethink, and ready to rebound when COVID-19 is all over. So it's going to be a lot of different in how we do our business, Gary.
All right, thanks for that. Mark, you get the last word on looking into the crystal ball here. What do you think will change?
Yeah, I think my biggest concern is also about air travel. It's such an essential component to international B2B exhibitions. So will it be more expensive? Will flights to second-tier cities drop down? That'll make it harder to hold events in other cities other than core cities, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Singapore, Bangkok. So I'm concerned about how easy it's going to be to get to other cities and the cost of that. But I do think people return to their habits pretty quickly. So once confidence returns, whether that is through a vaccine or whether it's just through the eradication of a safe network of countries, I think we'll pop back pretty quickly in exhibitions. Somebody was asking me when it will return back to, I think it was Pam was asking about when it'll return back, exhibitions will return back to the pre-COVID-19 levels. I guess this is not UFI's official position. I'll just give my view because it is a bit of crystal ball gazing. Definitely not this year, not in 2020. With Europe in the state it's in right now, and with the way it is in the US, I just can't see international buyers from those key markets making it to shows in Asia in this year. So that puts us into at least the first quarter of 2021 or maybe the middle of next year.
All right, I'm going to jump in there with a couple of predictions, and they're not necessarily just related to the industry. One is that there's more people in the world now that have experienced what it's like to work virtually from home. And there are more companies in the world that have figured out that there's economies of scale in doing that, and that actually they can get the work product delivered without having to rent expensive office space to keep all their people in. I'm not suggesting the whole world's going to go virtual, but I am suggesting that corporations will incorporate more virtual work arrangements and also reduce their overheads and achieve more economies of scale. The other interesting thing is there's research coming out that's saying that people are working longer hours from home than they were typically doing when they came to the office. That in itself is a question about productivity. Working long hours doesn't necessarily equate to productivity, but it does say that corporations can maybe rethink how they're structuring their overheads and how they're structuring their work arrangements. As far as our industry, a lot of people are talking about virtual conferences and things like that. I've been in this industry over 30 years. That's been a worry for 30 years. Will virtual conferencing replace our destinations and our supplier products? I don't think it will. People still have a need to get together. All four of us, I'll speak for all four of us, we'd rather be in the Philippines right now having nice Philippine food and meeting the local people and having that cultural experience. But also we actually accomplish more by meeting face to face. So in my view, the change though will be more hybrid meetings. I do think all kinds of exhibitions, incentives, associations will incorporate virtuality into their live events. And they'll do that more than before because now they've experienced it and they've learned how to do it. And I think here's a hopeful prediction for you. I don't think the world's going to go through another pandemic like this. Now, that's really stepping out there. But I think the reason that this has been so painful is that we were all complacent and we weren't prepared and we didn't respond fast enough. And I think we've all learned a lesson, at least I hope we have. So I think that's a little bit of a hopeful view, and maybe it won't happen again. We're really on time there. I really want to give my thanks and the audience thanks to all of our great speakers today. It was a really interesting, enjoyable, I hope informative session. I also wanted to thank Secretary Bernadette Romulo-Puyat for joining us and kicking us off. I want to thank the Philippines Tourism Board and PACEOS and the Department of Tourism for making this happen today. Thanks to the tech team in the background, it went pretty smooth. I think everybody stayed connected. And last but not least, thanks to you, the audience. It's been our pleasure to come to you and to get to visit with you, at least virtually, in the Philippines. And as the last word, we'll just say again to Noor. Noor, it's clear they want to have a ICA meeting, so make that happen before too long. Make that happen. Make that happen, Noor. Okay, we're right on time there. Again, thanks everyone for joining. We'll have to do it again sometime. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, everyone.
Gary, thanks. Bye.